Hello. You're listening to Angel Nears, the podcast. Angel Nears is a Silicon Valley community for startup builders where founders and operators share their firsthand knowledge on how to build and scale startups. I'm your host, Oleg Kuchikov, and our guest today is Jan Grinshtein, founder of Nsight Intelligence that provides the most powerful data and analytics intelligence platform ever made for product teams. Today, we're discussing the realities of building a startup and how design partnerships can help to improve the odds of crossing the proverbial chasm. But before we get into all that, Jan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Excited to have you. And before we get started, maybe just learn a little bit more about you. Can you just share just a little bit about your background and what led you to starting Nsight?
Oh, wow. Where do I begin? Well, let's kind of dive back into 18 years ago. Let's start there. Before we go farther than that, but let's start about 18 years ago. So 18 years ago, I was an aspiring designer, a web designer for that matter, visual designer, web designer at the time. And I found myself in New York and I was homeless. Story for another day. But in that specific situation, what happened is I discovered something at the time of being homeless that I could basically use design to elevate myself out of it. And what happened in that time of period is the fact that I landed in one of the largest law firms in New York State as my client, and my career kind of took off from there. I built out a global design career across agencies and so forth. And then at some point, I got burnt out, and I worked with some larger companies. And point being is that when I burnt out, I decided to quit the design industry altogether. At the time, I needed something that would get me out of the house. I picked up photography and went working as a photographer for a few years. And then one of my buddies who works in the tech industry as an IP lawyer, he called me up and said, "Hey, I'm helping this accelerator program out of Europe to set up a location with Cisco in Israel, the startup accelerator called Startup Bootcamp. Would you be interested in being a mentor on a design side? Because they have everything under the sun apart from design." I said, "Sure. Do I have to design anything?" He said, "No." Perfect. I'll do it. And so I find myself basically mentoring aspiring entrepreneurs building startups and the side of product design, branding, marketing, and so forth. I've done it for a few years. And then 2014, when I got back to New York, I made a conscious decision to go back into the tech world as a designer and work exclusively with startups, because I had this kind of idea and the promise to myself is that I don't want to work on anything that I ever worked on before. Coming from agencies is incredibly difficult because I basically worked on anything and everything under the sun for over 400 companies in that decade. And so I found myself doing things that I've never worked on before. 3D printing first, special education technology after that, cybersecurity after that, relationship tech right after that, and then AI, which was my last role before I did my own thing, started my own thing.
Incredible. And I'm going to try not to ask about what led you to how you got to 18 years ago being homeless in New York. That sounds incredible. But I'd just like to hone in a little bit on what kind of design we're talking about here. You know, it's such a nebulous term. It can mean so many things. Is it graphical design? Is it product design? It sounds like it encompasses everything, and you tried a lot. So could you just be a little more specific and explain to me what kind of design you were doing?
So in the last decade, I was mostly specializing in product design, user research, UX design, a little bit of branding, a little bit of marketing, because at startups, you wear a bunch of different hats. But my main specialty still is product design, UX design, user behavior, UX research. I kind of built myself a little name in the industry that I specialize in early stage startups, where I would just walk in and build out the entire function from the ground up. Assembling teams, building products, essentially building the first iterations of the products to test out and make sure we're actually building the right things for the customer or whatever we're trying to build. As an example, there's several products that essentially I created as a flagship for several companies that are being used today. One of them is my last company that I was a part of that got acquired last year. I basically helped them discover the AI assistant they were trying to build, what will be and how the interaction should be for the human being to have actual value from the product. which eventually led to having a flagship product in the company.
Well, thanks for explaining. And now we understand a little bit more about the work you were doing. How did that lead you to creating Nsight?
That actually goes back about 5 years ago, I would say.
Okay.
So I was head of design at a cybersecurity company in New York, and we were growing exponentially. We just raised our Series B, I think. That was the raise. We're moving from a tiny office to half a floor on 6th Avenue. We are growing, obviously, hiring a bunch of people. And we started to implement, quote unquote, middle management and new executives, right? We brought in chief revenue officer, brought in VP of sales, we brought in VP of customer experience, we brought in VP of engineering, and the list goes on. And so we're sitting in that new shiny office in the conference room, and I find myself around the conference table with a bunch of other people, probably a dozen plus. And we're trying to make a decision for what we're building next quarter as a company. Just the usual quarterly roadmap planning like any other company does, or most companies do. 2.5 hours later, maybe 3 gallons of coffee down the road, we walk out of the meeting with 0 decisions made and booking a meeting for the next day to make decisions. I don't want to swear on your show, but I was absolutely frustrated. And so I went home that weekend, and I tried to spend the entire weekend to figure out, how do I make sure we build things our customers need, our users like, and I don't offend anyone in the company?
Yeah.
So what I decided to do at the time is I essentially informed my team to go to every single department in the organization and get access to all of their tools. Salesforce, Jira, Asana, Mondays, whatever, Intercom, Zendesk, Confluence, all of it, literally all of it. And what we started doing is we started pulling all the data, dumping it into Dovetail, that's a UX research data repository. And we spent basically weeks essentially organizing everything, discovering the user issues, tagging it accordingly with things like pain points, user requests, distrust, annoyances, and then the list goes on. And then we try to compare it with what we're seeing from our external research, right? As a team that we're doing, talking to our customers, doing usability testing with our users, user interviews, and so forth. And once we start finding these kind of trending alignments, these are the things we start bringing into the roadmap planning to say, these are the things we need to concentrate as a company on. And typically, we'll select maybe like main 3 or 4 items to concentrate on. Surprisingly, that actually became super successful. Like, we actually started building things our customers really needed, our users really enjoyed. We increased our revenue. We increased our customer base. I was the first UX professional to ever be invited to speak at Identiverse, which is the largest digital identity event in the country. And over the last 5 years, I would say, I've spoken with over 2,000 designers just to realize the problem is existing basically everywhere. And then I spent about another 4 years, last 4 years, educating maybe like 10, 15, or 20 other design product leaders of how to deploy my specific framework. Wrote an article about it. It was published on UX Collective. And so, December 23, I stepped down as head of design at my last company where I was. And it was January or February, actually. I was sitting on the couch with my wife, and I was trying to make a decision what I want to do with my life. What do I want to do next? Yeah, I've done a lot. I worked across agencies and startups. I built teams. I've built products. I've done incredible things. I'm a mentor. I'm a speaker. I was thinking of writing a book. I'm also a photographer, so I love that. I have a photography studio here in the house. So like, maybe I should just quit the entire tech and design industry and go be a photographer. But then I had this, some people would call it an aha moment. I would probably call it a moment of clarity. And the moment of clarity for me was somehow I could clearly see how my framework is operating as an actual product. Knowing everything that I've known thus far about AI technologies, because I got into AI before ChatGPT was even a thing publicly, back in 2022. Mm-hmm. And so I turned to my wife that day and I said, listen, I think I want to build my company. Surprisingly, my wife is very supportive and she's like, sure, go for it. So here we are, building a thing.
Incredible. I'm going to skip around here and ask you, as a tech veteran who's surely experienced successes and failures, what are some of the most common decision-making pitfalls that you observed that led to those failures? I heard your you talking about your 2.5 hour, 3 hour meeting with all the coffee. What were some of the things from that meeting that made it difficult to come to a decision?
I would say that from the last 5 companies that I was a part of, I can almost pinpoint personal biases, lack of available information, essentially data, and incorrect data assumptions. So what really happens is that specific meeting that I mentioned, right? People came and we had massive arguments of whose feature is more important and whose idea is better and whatnot. But the reality is, as much as this process was frustrating to me, what I realized later on is the fact that I really cannot be upset at all these people that came to the table with their ideas or their thoughts. Why? Because they're coming with their set of data, with their set of view on where the product should go, on their opinions on the direction of the company. A sales team has a very specific target that they need to hit. And so from their perspective, they need tools in order to hit these targets. Essentially, if you build these features, we can sell. Customer support or experience, same thing. They're coming from perspective of customers, let's say, complaining about a product and saying that if you don't add X feature or remove this feature or fix this feature, I'm going to stop being your customer. QA or engineering coming from the same perspective. So everyone has their own perspective and everyone has their own personal biases of what they think should be done. And so that typically leads to, as you said, pitfalls. Like my first startup in 2014, it was a 3D printing company. It was the hottest cupcake on the market at the time. It was the moment where MakerBot got acquired by Stratasys for, I think, over $500 million. We were probably the third famous or known 3D printing company out of Brooklyn because our founder used to be a VP at MakerBot and they split and he built his own company. We had investors knocking down our doors with open checks. I'm not kidding. And the founder at that time said, nope, I'm not going to share a piece of my pie. And I'm going to go and build a printer that I want to build regardless of my users saying, no, we want something else. And from that moment of his decision, 6 months later, regardless of the fact that we made over $600,000 in pre-sales, we closed shop, went out of business, right? So a lot of these decisions are biases and misunderstandings of data, misunderstandings of users, misunderstandings of the customer's needs. They lead to some of these conflicts and issues and eventually to failures.
Yeah, it reminds me of that information overload or the cereal aisle problem. I'm at a loss for words here of what to really call it. But when you have so many choices that you can't really decide.
Yes.
But let's get more specific into some of the challenges of data, specifically data overload. Let's start there. Can you explain how Nsight, do you prefer saying in or Nsight?
Nsight. It's Nsight, yes. There's a reason for that. And you can actually read that reason on our website.
Hey, there's a little call to action. Love that. We'll mention again, check out the website at the end and we'll give you listeners the URL for that. But you'll have to listen to the whole episode. For now, we're talking data overload and how Nsight addresses the specific challenge of data overload. Could you please explain that?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. So what happens in a lot of organizations when they collect a lot of data, and most organizations at some point of their maturity start to collect enormous amount of data, right? So when you're starting as a startup, typically you'll have something like maybe Google Analytics. Maybe you'll have, I don't know, HubSpot, right? And you track how people navigate your website. You track where they click, how they go, at what point do they convert, and so forth. Then when you actually put out a product, you put in some telemetry to see how people navigate your product. Where do they stall? Where do they click? How long it takes them to stay somewhere? How do they navigate from one point to another? And then the list goes on. But as this entire series of data balloons into not only just, let's say, textual data of people feedback and people complaints to analytics that coming from like Mixpanel and Datadog or Google Analytics and so forth, it creates a data overload for people to really, truly, holistically approach and understand it. So that's why, in many cases, product teams or marketing teams or engineering teams, they always isolate themselves on a very specific data set that they're looking at, right? So product and design teams will typically look at the behavioral data. What happens with the actual product? How do users actually use the product? Then engineering will look at errors, right? Error logs, mistakes, issues, bugs, and so forth. Same thing goes for sales, right? They will typically track of how people convert, how do they check out, and things like that. Marketing, same thing. And that's where it creates a massive data overload with the organization when no one in the company knows how to decipher all of this together and make sense of it together. So that's what we call a data overload. When you have too much of it, that it paralyzes you to the point where you don't even use it. And we hilariously found that, if I remember correctly, in our research last year, over 55 or 54% of companies actually report the fact that they don't even use their analytics or data because it's just too much. They don't have the time or energy or even understanding to decipher and translate the data into actual insights. So that's a data overload when it's too much.
Yeah, that's crazy. And yet I'm sure they're paying for it, right? None of this is free.
They do.
Sure. How about data and analytics disconnect? What would be the specific challenge of that?
That's the part that I mentioned where you have textual data, what we call kind of like the ticketing systems, and actual analytics. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that you have a mobile app and you have, you have 10 million users. Among the 10 million users, about 10% of people having a very specific problem in your app. They're failing to do something. Something happens when they go and check out through your, maybe let's say you're selling something. They're hitting the checkout button. They're expecting to see a form for them to input their credit card information and then complete the purchase and get a notification that whatever they purchased, it's on the way. But in that moment, there was a disconnect or there was a bug or there was an issue that is happening. And so you'll have 2 points of what we call data, or you'll have the analytical data. This is where you're either a bug snug or some other analytical system records that there is an actual technical issue there that happening that is not allowing your customer to move on to the next step. At the same time, not all 10% of people experience this problem, but maybe about 30 to 40% of those 10% will actually hit a button of report a problem or support or something and complain about it. Now, those 20, 30% of those 10%, they will complain about it slightly differently. Some people will say, I was trying to check out, it didn't work. Some might say, I was trying to click on a button that says checkout and I failed. I was trying to buy this product and I couldn't, and the list goes on. So each person will have its own kind of version of what actually happened that is related to a very specific issue. Now, as a researcher within your organization, UX researcher or product manager or whatnot, you will look, for instance, at this ticketing system, and your customer experience or customer support will report on the fact that, hey, we're having this problem and seeing a lot of complaints. Now, they have no idea how to tie it directly to an actual analytical record of a bug or a technical issue. Right. That exactly what means there is that an engineer or whoever is tracking on that side is going to have to talk to customer support or customer experience to see if something is being complained about or reported that is tied to that specific technical issue. Because if it's a technical issue and nobody's complaining about, nobody's going to fix that. Because it's not a problem.
Right.
For companies, if people and actual customers not complaining about something, it's not a problem. But it could be, right? And so our system, for instance, is able to data triangulate between analytics and data to see what are things that are actually happening and how do they tie together and then flag it up.
Can you speak just a little bit more about how you address these challenges of both data overload and disconnect?
So we unify everything. We do have a patent pending core process stack that I'm not going to get into details of how actually everything works. Mm-hmm. But what we do in a nutshell, in simple words, is we consider ourselves a unified data intelligence and decision automation platform. What it really means is we integrate with, right now 15-ish, by next week 20-ish applications. By end of the year, it's going to be 100 plus. Next year, probably closer to 300 different applications. So what we do, our system is essentially sucks in data, raw data, unstructured data from all the analytics tools, all of the textual tools, which is the ticketing, things like intercom, Zendesk, backlogs, and then the list goes on, documentation, Notion, and stuff like that. And when it sucks everything in, and analytics as well, it runs data triangulation to understand what is actually happening and what kind of user issues are actually being recorded or can be found. And then we then tag everything based on a 3 main tagging systems, which is divided between emotional, behavioral, and technical. So our AI systems know how to go and find the most minutia things in human communication or conversation or reporting or complaining, if you will, to actually understand that these 5 million people that are complaining about something ultimately sounds like slightly different, but it's actually about the same problem. And then we can take that problem and tie it directly to analytics that we discovered is happening in a specific point in time in the product. And then we tag it all together and structure a list of tags that we discovered in user issues. And again, we tag it with things like user distrust or complaint or annoyance or pain point or whatever the case might be. Right? So that's how we actually discover all these things.
That's incredible.
I hope I answered your question.
No, yeah, I think so. Because I was asking how you address those challenges. How does it integrate with existing tools? How are you pulling in, my Notion or my Zendesk? What is that experience like?
We do it through 2 ways. Either we build our own API integrations or we use a third-party partner. It's very simple. There are probably 2, 3, 4, 5 products that I know of right now that they utilize a unified API approach, which means you integrate with a single API from that specific company that provides that service, and then through them, you essentially pull all the other API integrations that they integrate with. So they're acting almost like a bridge that you don't have to go and spend your own engineering time and power to integrate with a bunch of tools that are basically standard. And standard, I mean by Intercom, Zendesk, Jira, Asana, Slack, Notion, all the AI APIs or LLM APIs. These are considered to be industry standard, and so what they do is they build a library of integrations, and when you integrate with them, you can just go through the library and just basically select whatever you want to integrate with. Some will allow you to do a full integration where you pull all of the data, including the ticketing and communications and responses and then whatnot. And some they'll allow only authentication. If they allow only authentication, that means we need to do some work on our end as well to start pulling other data.
And can you repeat, you said once this information is pulled in, you're ranking your ticketing or your rubric or you're trying to interpret this information through, what was it? Emotion, logistic, and operation? Or I forget.
We're structuring it based on 3 main categories of tagging. It's behavioral, emotional, and technical.
Behavioral, emotional, technical. Okay, cool. And what is that look like for the user? How do they decide the weights of each one? Or can you tell me a little bit more about that?
That's an awesome question. We actually simplify everything to a point that anyone in the company can understand. Like literally, you can pull a janitor off the street and they will understand what they're looking at. The goal is to make things very simple. Being somebody who's been on product and design teams for 2 decades, I can tell you that about 90% of product and design professionals don't really understand how to properly decipher things like Mixpanel or Datadog or whatnot, how to structure a really valuable reporting system that will be simple enough to understand. And so what we do visually, all you're looking at, there's no graphs, there's no charts, there's no data sets. What you're seeing is a list of all these tags that I just shared with you based on these 3 main categories. Mm-hmm. And we just show you the number of these specific issues. So let's say, as I said, you have 10 million users and 10% of them are complaining about or having issues with a very specific thing. We might tag it with maybe 3 different tags. One would be a pain point because it's a pain point. The next would be misunderstanding because maybe they're misunderstanding something. And the third would be a bug. And so these are three main things that will be bubble up at the list all the way to the top to show you the actual number of issues discovered among these users. And then in addition to that, not in the current state of our product, but probably towards Q3 of this year, we'll allow our users to click into each tag and we'll show you drill in of an actual discovered user issues and where our AI tagged that specific part.
Yeah, that helps me visualize it, like seeing it as a list and clicking on things. And it sounds really interesting. And yeah, when you were explaining it, I'm realizing what my question is. How do you actually interact with this thing as a user? And that's kind of the question you're probably asking yourself all the time as a design person. So that's something I'm sure we could spend a lot of time talking about. But I do want to get to this design partnerships portion of the interview here soon. Before that, how the user interacts with your product might be one interesting challenge of bringing your product to market. Do you see that as the main challenge? Are there other big challenges you're thinking about when it comes to bringing Nsight to market?
I think the biggest, the interaction part is not the biggest challenge. We overwhelmingly got from all of our existing customers and the one that we're showing the product to one trending response. This is very simple. Like, wow, like this is simple, clear, clean. I understand everything. And that was the point of it. Because as I said earlier, a lot of people that use our product or will be using our product within the organizations are not necessarily people that know how to really understand a data scientific based product like Mixpanel as an example, or Datadog. Another great example of that fact is that I had a UX researcher on my team a few years ago. She had a master's degree in UX research, and she still spent about 30 to 40% of her time trying to figure out Mixpanel and calling them to ask them, what does this mean? Or what does that mean? And to me, that's a wasteful time and energy on the team side that could be used for something more valuable. And so from our perspective, probably the biggest challenge we will see, and I'm anticipating, is a lot of questions about data privacy, data retention policies. How do we handle data? How do we store it? How do we manage it? If somebody wants to walk away, what happens to their data and things like that? That's thus far has been the biggest question that we got from our customers.
That's a really good question. Let's save that one for a rainy day. I'd like to get to the design partnerships portion. Before I ask why design partnerships, I'd like to ask about what they are. It's a relatively new term for me. Can you talk about what a design partnership is before we get into unpacking it?
Sure. So I think that the term itself was coined by Y Combinator. But I might be wrong. I think this is where I saw it or read about it last, and it was last year. I didn't dive too much deeper into understanding what exactly they really thought about it. The overarching idea that they had is find a customer that essentially will sign some sort of paper with you and build this thing with you, right? And that kind of like gives you some sort of validity of, oh, there are certain companies willing to go into bed with me on this and build this together. When I looked at it, I kind of decided to take it from a different approach, right? It's not necessarily our customers getting into quote unquote bed with us. It's more on the level of I am trying to, like, our product essentially. The goal of our product or the vision of our product is to serve enterprise, including SMBs as well. I don't want to neglect SMBs, but we are going towards the enterprise. We are going towards Fortune 500 customers. In order to do that, there are two ways for me to understand how they operate from inside, right, of their own companies. It's either doing as some other founders did, go and get a job at one of the Fortune 500 and work there for a few years and basically try to understand how they work inside. Or do some sort of partnership with them to really understand how they do things and how we can be helpful to them. And so my goal with design partnerships and the way I structured it is we're going to go into this relationship for the next 12 months. I will give you the latest and greatest part of our product for free for the next 12 months. No charge whatsoever. But on the other end of this quote-unquote stick is your obligation to us as a company to provide us with a timely and regular feedback on our product, of what is wrong with it, what's working, what's not working, what kind of integrations you need that you don't have or don't see. In addition to that, you will allow me to work directly with your engineering team on your internal tooling integrations, which means a lot of these enterprise companies have their own internal either data repositories, analytics tools, and so forth that they don't buy off the shelf. They build themselves. In order for us to be able to provide them with the value that we're creating for smaller companies, we need to integrate with their databases. We need to integrate with their analytics tools and so forth, but we can't because they don't have APIs. It's not a public thing. And so we need to figure out a way to do that. So that's why I decided I'm going to go into these partnerships and I'm limiting them. It's not like everyone can. There's a limit is 5. Right now we got left 2 slots. And so we go into these 5 partnerships with 5 selected companies to figure out how do we build our product together in such a way that works for our customers in the long run. And of course, post 12 months, we're going to be reevaluating the contract and they will be onboarding as a paying customer if we met our obligations as a company. That's the goal for these partnerships, is to build our product ready for enterprise within the next 12 months with enterprise going on this with us.
That's really interesting. How quickly are you looking to add new design partners? Because about the timing of it, because when it comes to growth, timing is very important, right? Who you're talking to and when is going to really affect how you grow. I guess what I'm asking is, did you like kind of find 3 design partners and take off with 3 at once, or did you add them more slowly when you're building these partnerships? What's the strategy?
It is a slow process. It's not that we found all 3 or 4 or 5 and said, okay, let's disperse and sign contracts. No, it's a slow process. Some I found, some came and found us. I have a few companies right now that essentially knocked on our door and then said, hey, can we be design partners? Right? After I share it with some people within their circles that we're doing that. And so right now, I can't say names, but we are waiting for signature from a Fortune 500 company and another 2 Fortune 500 companies essentially in quote-unquote negotiations, if you will, or conversations.
That's very cool. I guess and part of the goal or part of the contract is if certain requirements are met, then they essentially get converted from a partner to a customer. Is that how I'm understanding it?
Yeah. So at the end of the 12 months or close to it, once we've met the obligations as a company and the value that we promised from the get-go, once we've built everything that we've built in order to integrate with their internal systems, we will have another conversation to see, okay, are we going to convert this into an actual paying customer, or we're going to do it with another customer, right? Because for us, again, it's not necessarily this customer or that customer. For us is to really understand how enterprise level companies do things internally when it comes to big data.
Yeah. It's a really interesting strategy. Let's talk about like making sure it succeeds. How can founders effectively structure the feedback loop they have with design partners to ensure they're getting the consistent and valuable input that they're looking for?
We're approaching it from 2 different places. One, we're going to be creating a Slack channel specifically for our design partners, where we're going to be engaging with them on a regular basis, meaning on a daily basis. And the second thing is so before everything goes to production, everything goes to staging for us to QA and test. We share that staging with our design partners before it goes to production for them to test out, play around, see how things works, see how the new feature functions and so forth. And at that time, we're giving them a specific time period of about a week to provide us full feedback on what they think, what they see. Is there any issues that are foreseeing with the feature we're about to release? Is there anything they're missing that we haven't thought about? And at the same time, I'm in regular conversations with my direct people that I essentially talk to at the company. Typically, these are senior design leadership.
Mm-hmm. And then how do you measure the success of a design partnership? What kind of metrics are you tracking?
Right now, we're tracking if we're actually delivering features that are useful.
And is that part of the 12-month contract? Like, do they reflect each other, or
No, not necessarily. Right now we're simply tracking to see we're about to build this thing, right? And we put it into staging. We give it to our design partner. They're testing it, they're using it, they're playing with it, they're coming back with all the feedback. We ingest the feedback from all these people, do our analysis of, okay, we're going to actually address this, and that. We're going to fix this, and that. We're going to change X, Y, and Z, and then put it out back to staging again for one last round of testing. Once it passes that test, we put it in production, and then seeing if it reflects to the rest of the customers. Other people that are also using the product, if they're finding the specific functionality feature as useful as well on the whole, then the value of that feedback loop is incredible for us. For us, it's a learning process right now. Now, obviously, once we get to a point of 6, 7, 8 months in, when we're ready for enterprise, we're going to start in seeing how we convert these specific design partnerships into paying customers. And that's going to be our success measurement as well.
It seems like an interesting question. Like, I kind of don't want to harp on it too long, but are you measuring like the number of features that get delivered, or are you measuring the feedback from the customers? What does success mean? Is it like we delivered X amount of features, we said we were going to do this many, and here's how many we have? Or, I mean, eventually you want to get into paying customers and subscriptions, right? But I guess during this design stage or design partnership stage, the earlier kind of growth stages, what are you tracking to get to that paying customer, like early on?
Quality of feedback. It's not about how many features we ship. It's about the quality of feedback we get that actually being converted and become a valuable feature or function.
Yeah. Okay. How about on the other side? How do you structure the contract, and how does your partner structure the contract to make sure it's mutually beneficial?
Thus far, we didn't have anyone coming back and saying, take this out or add this in. Mm-hmm. The contract we send out is pretty straightforward and simple. Is we're going to give you our product for the next 12 months. These are the conditions. You're going to be the first to get access to all of our latest, but we expect back a specific round of feedback. And this is how we're expecting that feedback. It can be through Slack communication, email conversations, booking meetings with them, having actual Zoom calls, recording these calls, and so forth. Mm-hmm. That's really it. At the end of the contract, we're just going to renegotiate and is that a word? Reconverse? No, it's not. Sorry, English is my third language, so
I get it. Yeah, it's my first, and I still struggle.
I wouldn't call it renegotiate because there's nothing to renegotiate essentially, but we all have an agreement of the fact that as soon as we're done with this contract, we'll reevaluate whether or not we're going to continue as customers. Some of them are, I wouldn't call it obligated, but some of our agreements today is essentially, yes, we will convert you into paying customers if we meet those obligations. Like, for instance, we have a design partnership that is tied directly to an LOI, right? In that situation, once we meet the obligations that we also set on the LOI, then we're converting both into just a paying customer.
Yeah. Let's just wrap up here. Thank you for taking me through design partnerships. It sounds like something people should already be doing, to be honest. Is it a new idea for you?
You mean design partnerships?
Yeah, like what's the difference between regular partnerships and a design partnership? Is that a silly question?
I wouldn't call it a silly question. I think a regular partnership is again, it depends on the contract, I guess. But me coming from the world of building products, I always like to build what I would call a customer advisory boards or some sort of that version, right? Where I have actual users or actual customers that have direct line of communication to the company and impact on the product, right? So essentially, we're building this together. And so the investment of the customer is a lot higher. Think of it this way. Somebody asked me about it a long time ago, and I basically referred an IKEA effect. I don't know if you're familiar with that mental model. So the IKEA effect is something that IKEA discovered a long time ago is that people who actually build their own furniture, they're a lot more invested to keep it for longer. Mm-hmm. Right? And so for us, design partnerships, to some degree, is the same thing, right? We want certain companies that we think are valuable for us to go for a long run and not just for a short term. And so we want to build those relationships with them to such degree where they're invested in the success of our product and our company as much as we are. And that's really what it is. It's allowing them to be at the front seat of us building things before it goes to anyone else, them having an impact on what is actually being built to some degree, of course. Nobody's dictating us what to do. Mm-hmm. Which also creates this incredible and valuable bond between us and that company or the team at that company, that we both want this product to succeed because they see the value of using that product internally for them. But at the same time, obviously, they want it to be tailored to their needs. And we get that. And so we're trying to build this together to have this investment.
I'm starting to see. Yeah, I think I get it a little bit more. So let's wrap up here. And we like to end the show with at least one pearl of wisdom. So let's get to it. It's kind of a classic. If you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice at the start of this journey of yours, what would that be? What would that piece of advice be?
I think maybe, super beginning probably. I would say that. And I think it's a classic founder, I wouldn't call it stupidity, but founder mistake is the fact that before you even have anything, you're rushing to talk to investors. And I think that's the one thing that I've learned thus far is, even though I had a great idea, even though I had a provisional patent on the core process stack that we had, right? We already had 20 or 30 design leaders from some incredible companies like Walmart and then SNCC and whatnot on our wait list, right? It still wasn't enough to, I think, go to investors and say, hey, give me $500,000 to go and build this thing, right? I think that's the one thing that I feel that I missed out a little bit. I should have concentrated my effort on building the team and building the product rather than going out and trying to talk to investors. So that's the advice I would have given myself is shut up, don't talk to anyone, just basically build a proper team that will help you build this product well, and then go out and talk to investors.
Okay, a nice specific piece of advice. Sometimes we get more general stuff, but yeah, I love it. Well, thanks, Jan. It's been great hearing from you. If the listeners are interested in learning more about Nsight and potentially learning more about what you're offering or how you came up with the name, where would they go for that?
That would be our name, Nsight, and app.com. So nsightApp.com.
All right. We're going to end the show there. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a rating. To learn more about our community, visit angelneers.com. Thanks to our chief engineer for production and editing. And Jan, thanks for joining us today. Best of luck on your journey.
Thank you for having me. It's been great. Good luck with you guys.